positive books that, nothing negative. I laugh about the first line. All is vanity. None of it matters at all.
Where is it? I lost it.
So Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. So you're too far. Job, Psalms, Proverbs.
I've come a long way.
We have.
Haven't we?
We have.
I have Ecclesiastes right
Fast
there.
and furious.
Well, like I said, we're flying over at a high level and just kind of going through basic stuff, and I think it's valuable because it's important to understand some of the themes. So the book of Ecclesiastes has widely been attributed to King Solomon, and there's some internal evidence for that. First of all, we'll see in verse 1, it says from the preacher. And then it says the son of David, the king. So almost certainly Solomon. Also, it's wisdom literature, which of course Solomon is the man who's noted for being the wisest man. There's really no reason to believe it's anybody else. So Solomon wrote 3 of the books of the Old Testament. He wrote Proverbs, Song of Solomon, or Song of Songs, and Ecclesiastes. All of them are at different stages of his life. Most believe that the Proverbs are kind of a collection that's later gathered together. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, of wise sayings he made throughout his life. Song of Solomon is certainly probably as he met his first potential wife. It's all about loving and cherishing and all that. Now we know he had, like 700 other concubines and like 300 other wives. So that's all kind of fun. Ecclesiastes is clearly written right at the end of his life, because Ecclesiastes is a look back at his life and really going, yeah, I didn't do so well. It's actually kind of interesting to look at Ecclesiastes as a look back at his life. We know that he died in about 931 BC, which puts the date of it somewhere between 940 and 931 BC is when it was written, or at least as go as we could. The reason it is written is Solomon wrote this book to show that material things fade away and that real meaning in life can only be found in things from above. The theme is everything under the sun is vanity. The term you will see a lot as you read through Ecclesiastes is it's all vanity, like kind of catch the wind. Okay. Key verse is found in Ecclesiastes 2:11. Then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and a striving after the wind. And there was nothing to be gained under the sun. See, real positive. He had a real positive outlook at this point. As we look at the book itself, looking at verse 1, it says the words of the preacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. And then verse 2, vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does a man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? Okay, so it's in poetic language, but notice it's what has a man gained by working all his life? Okay. Now, that sounds to be an interesting discussion, and it's not that he's talking about that you shouldn't work. He is going to talk extensively about what you chase. Okay, so first of all, he basically comes in and begins his story. It begins the book by saying that what does a man gain by all his toils? Because, he's just going to die. Once again, real positive. You work all your life, then you die. But then as he moves further in, you see in verse 8, it says, all things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear with hearing. So what he's really getting at is this idea that what is it worth to you to always be pursuing more? See, he's not talking that you shouldn't work. He's talking that you shouldn't be all about climbing. In a way, Ecclesiastes is really a discussion of this climbing for power, climbing for pleasure, climbing for wisdom, climbing for, always chasing something. And he says maybe what you chase matters. So he begins with at the end of chapter 1 with the vanity of wisdom. Now remember, God had given Solomon wisdom above any other person, and yet he says, yeah, it really didn't matter as much as I thought. He says, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. Okay, and then verse 15, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. And my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge, and I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. And I perceive that this also is but striving after wind. It's trying to catch something you can't grab onto. So this is the primary discussion of the book. Apart from God, anything that you chase after is chasing after something you can never catch. Okay, chapter 2 then goes, well, maybe I should chase pleasure. Maybe I should chase feeling good. Maybe I should chase indulging myself. Which, by the way, if we talk about the marriage thing for Solomon, is certainly something that he did. I chased pleasure. I chased Then he says, come now, I will test with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, it's mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched my heart how to cheer my body with wine. My heart still guided me with wisdom, and how to lay hold of folly. I planted gardens and parks, and I planted them with fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I had great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of man. I had so much stuff, everybody envied me. And he says, also my wisdom remained, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, and for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was a reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and all the toil I'd expended in doing it, and behold, it was all vanity, and a striving after wind. And there was nothing to be gained for all of my pleasure. It was all fleeting. It all just flitted away. So notice what Solomon is saying. I strived for this. I made it an idol in my life is really where this goes. So I decided to make pleasure my idol for a while and found it didn't satisfy me. Then in verse 12, I made living wisely my idol. And yeah, it didn't work out either. In verse 18, I made toil, doing work, keeping busy, climbing the ladder. This was also vanity, it says in verse 23. And then in verse 24, he kind of comes to a climax of this. And he says, there is nothing better for a person than he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. Now, I want to make sure we understand what he's actually saying. He's not talking about seeking pleasure. He's saying this: there is nothing better for a person than he should have food on his table, and he should be content with what he does. Now, it says it, mine has a little deal where it says, and find enjoyment and make his soul see good in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God, for apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? So what is he saying? Here is the best thing a man can hope for: to be content with what he's been given by God. For to the one who pleases him, this is the verse 26, one who pleases his God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner he has given the business of gathering and collecting. And this only to give to the one who pleases God. Only to not keep it. This is vanity and striving after wind. Okay. Chapter 3 begins one of the more famous discussions out of Ecclesiastes. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. Time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to harvest, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak, a time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. What is he saying? He's saying God has set a time in your life for all of these things.
Can I ask something? What does the tear mean? Is that planting?
Tear. So in other words, a time to rip apart and a time to sew back together.
Oh, okay.
A time to destroy, a time to, but even if you're looking at sewing, right? If you're working on, and I think of Joyce making quilts, and she would sew together two things, and she'd look and go, nope, that's not quite right. And then what would she do? She would, in a constructive manner, tear those two pieces apart. Why? To fix them. So there is a time, even when you're creating something, where there's a time that you take it apart. And that's that tear. Okay.
Start over.
What?
And start over.
Yeah. He's using opposites. Okay. The opposite of sewing something together is tearing it apart. There is a time for each of those. In the same way that being born and dying are opposite, there is a time for both of those. So, what is the point of that? Well, it comes back to the contentment. Is it time for you to have a child? Then be content with that. Is it time for someone to die? Be content with that, because that's God has put that time there. There is a time to plant crops, right? If you don't plant crops at the right time, what happens? Nothing comes up. So maybe it's time in your life to do some planting, or maybe it's time to do some harvesting. Now, the pluck up what is planted can both mean harvesting crops, but it can also mean plucking up the weeds, plucking up depending on where you're at. There is a time to kill. There is a time to heal. There is a time to tear things down. There is a time to build things up. And what should be the desire of our heart is to have God reveal to us what the time is for those things. And by the way, there is a reason why. This is another one of those passages in Scripture that is so often used in funerals. Why? There is a time to weep. There is a time when crying is appropriate. There's also a time where laughter is appropriate. And by the way, if you do the wrong one, what does it look like? You're out of step. There is a time to mourn. There is a time to dance for joy. Now, in some ways, that can mean our reaction to, and look at David. There was a time in David's life where he had to mourn over his sin. And there was also a time where he danced in praise to God. Right? We look at the moment where he's carrying the Ark of the Covenant in. And what is he doing? He's dancing before God. And Micah, his wife, says, "You're embarrassing yourself." And David goes, "If it's for God, I'll embarrass myself way more than that." And yet, after the sin with Bathsheba, what does he do? He mourns. Because God is against him. Because God has placed his hand against him because of his sin. And he mourns over his sin. There's a time to throw rocks and time to gather rocks. It really is Solomon in his wisdom saying, remember that whatever this time is in your life, do it. If it is a time to mourn because of sorrow in your life and things that are going on in your life, or because you need to repent before God, then it's time for that and you need to do it. Is it time to dance and praise for God because he's done incredible things in your life? Then you should do that. Everything has a time. Now, here's the other good news. It also means that none of these things are permanent. So let's make sure we understand. There's a time to weep, but your weeping won't be forever. There's a time to mourn, but your mourning won't be forever. That's a powerful discussion. I heard a guy say that his favorite verse in the Bible was "it came to pass," because it didn't come to stay.
Oh, I like that.
This too shall pass.
There are times in our life that feel like they are permanent and permanently bad. They are not permanent. They are a season. Now, if you live in New Mexico, you know some seasons feel longer than others. Right? I laugh about the fact that they joke about Texas does have 4 seasons. They have December, January, February, and summer. Is that really true? No. But there are parts of the world where it is hot and summer is much longer. But guess what? There's also value to those places because that also means the growing season's longer. There are places where winter is longer. But if you live in Alaska, I always laugh about this. Do you know when 90% of all supplies are sent somewhere in Alaska? In the dead of winter. Because all those lakes freeze deep enough that you can get large vehicles there.
Wow.
When they talk about the shows like Ice Road Truckers, what is the idea of that? Well, the idea of that is that it's an area where it gets super, super cold all winter and the lakes freeze with 6 or 7 feet of ice. Well, once the ice is that thick, it will hold a fully loaded semi. And they will literally run semis across water to get supplies to some of these really, really remote Inuit villages and all of that. Well, here's the funny part. If it wasn't so cold so long of the year, it would be much more difficult to live there. Not that it being 30 below zero is fun to live in, but there are benefits even to those things. There's a season for everything. Then in verse 9, what gain has the worker from his toil? Well, I've seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also put eternity into a man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good, to be content and to do good as long as they live. And then he says, this is God's gift to man, that he can find joy in his labor and he can do good. And then verse 14, I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it. Nothing can be taken away. God has done it so that people fear before him. That which is already has been, that which is to be already has been, and God seeks what has been driven away. And then he goes on and comes back to man and he says, look, if all you're doing is chasing after things, it's all dust. In the place of judgment, there is wickedness. In the place of righteousness, there is wickedness. But it all falls away. Chapter 4 goes through the same thing. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh, verse 5. Okay, then in 5, he kind of pulls up and he says, fear God. That's the ultimate thing. You need to fear God. Verse 4 of chapter 5 says, when you vow a vow to God, don't delay in paying it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than you should vow and not pay. Then in verse 8, he begins with vanity again. He says the vanity of wealth and honor. And basically he says this, the more you get, the more you're going to want. And eventually you're going to have to give it to kids who don't care about it. I know that sounds really weird, but that is a part of this discussion. There's a grievous evil. This is verse 13 of chapter 5. There's a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. He's a father of a son, but he has nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. Now, what is he saying? Well, he is saying the same thing that Jesus said when he was talking about the man with the barns. I don't want you to miss this. Solomon is making the same case. You work and work and work and work to gather. Well, what does Jesus talk about? He says there's this man, he had a bumper crop. He had a crop like no other. He had a crop like some of the people who grow hay are having this year because of all the rain. And he says, wow, I've had so much. My barns are not big enough to hold all of this. Now, here's the fun part. His barns would have been of a size that would have provided for him until next year. That is clearly what Jesus is getting at. I have barns to store my grain that will meet my need plus. for the year. So he makes a choice and he says, I've got all this grain. I've got more grain than I will use in 3 or 4 years. My barns won't hold it all. I know what I'll do. I'll build bigger barns. I'll spend money to build bigger barns to hold more when I have more than I need or really could ever use. So what is the point Jesus is getting at? Well, there is the level at which at the end of it, he goes, and then I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry because now I won't have to work anymore. Because I have all this extra. And God goes, but you're going to die tomorrow. Well, isn't this exactly what he's saying? You gather and gather and gather and think, oh, I finally got all I need. And then you die. What was the wisdom move to help others with the excess? What should I do with all this excess grain? Well, there are people that need it. Now, I'm going to take a minuscule political moment. It does not say that someone else comes and says, I'm going to take what you've made and give it to somebody who hasn't done anything for it. What he's saying is, if you have more than you need, then you should be generous to those who are in need. It is the choice of the person in Ecclesiastes and in the gospel. He's not preaching redistribution. He's preaching charity, which, by the way, is a major biblical discussion all throughout. Okay, let's take a moment and go back into the rules that God set up. We've discussed it before, and by the way, we've discussed that the 70 years of exile were punishment for them not doing it. Said for 6 years you will plant and sow and reap your crop. 6 years you go in and do that, and then the 7th year you will not plant anything. You will let the land sit every 7th year. Now, this sounds weird, but I want you to understand what it's meaning. On that 7th year, guess what's going to happen? You're going to have crops come up. Why? Because if you plant wheat seed for 6 years in a field, wheat and barley, right? Are you going to get every stalk of barley? In fact, you were told not to. So what's going to happen in that 7th year? A bunch of barley is going to come up. A bunch of wheat's going to come up. Volunteer, we call it. Oh, well, then I can go harvest all that volunteer. And God goes, nope. That volunteer is so that the poor amongst you can eat and the beasts of the field can eat. Now, it does bring up the question, does that mean that they only had that extra every 7th year? I don't know. There is some discussion about whether it rotated. But let me tell you what I do know without the slightest bit of hesitation. The reason that the exile to Babylon was 70 years long was because for 70 cycles they had not done that. The land deserved its rest. They had not given the land its rest, so I'm going to kick you out until the land is made up for all the rest you didn't give it. Now, let's be fair about a couple of things. In modern farming, what have we learned? If you don't rotate, your land dries up. Particularly with cotton. If you just go in and plant cotton every year, rain, shine, moon, whatever, eventually your land won't support it anymore. So here's the fun part. We shouldn't be surprised by that because that's what God told them would happen. This is exactly what he said. Here's what'll happen, guys. Just trust me. If you will follow the rule that you plant for 6 years and you let it lie fallow on a 7th year, here's what's going to happen to you at every 6th year. You are going to have a crop like you cannot imagine. You're going to have so much, you're going to be able to eat it the rest of the 6th year, all of the 7th year, have enough to plant and have enough to eat till the 8th year crop comes in. If you will follow my rule, I will make sure you eat. But don't get greedy. There is a definitive element to this rule that God set up, was that you planting and harvesting on the 7th year is you being greedy. I will make sure you have enough at the end of year 6. Now, let me ask you a question. How did he prove that that was going to be true? With the manna. What was the rule on the manna? Okay. What you need, only what you need for the day. But what happened on every 6th day? You took double. Took enough for both day 6 and day 7. Okay. Now, on day 1 through 6, or days 1 through 5, if you decided to take more than you needed, what did you find the next morning? It'd gone bad. Overnight, it'd gone bad. On day 7, what'd you find? It was all fine. It was fine an extra day. But if you didn't gather more than you were, if you didn't do what God said and gather the double portion on the 6th day, what did you have to eat on the 7th day? Nothing. It says they went out on the 7th day to gather, and there was nothing there. So watch the beauty of God teaching them to trust him. Here are my instructions. On day 1, so let's use the weekdays. On Sunday, you go out, you gather manna. You make bread, you make biscuits, you make whatever. But remember that you could eat it directly, or you could grind it and turn it into flour and use it for bread or pancakes or whatever. Okay? But at the end of the day, you threw out anything you didn't use. If you waited till the next morning, your jar of manna that you had left over went rancid and you couldn't use it. You had to go out and gather more. I've only given you enough for each day. Day 2, you go out and gather manna. You make all your stuff. You do all the things you were going to do. Now, it doesn't necessarily say that if you ground it up and made cakes out of it or what, that they went rancid. But the idea was if you gathered too much manna for you to use, then it would go bad. Then on day 6, God said, now I need you to gather double. Well, why should we do that? Because on day 7, there won't be any. And on day 7, the whole rule about it going rancid won't apply. So when they moved into the land and they started farming, God basically said, I want you to use the same rules with your fields that you did with the manna. Year 1, you plant, you harvest, you keep for yourself enough for you to eat the rest of the year and for you to plant the next year. And then anything beyond that, be generous with it. And give it.
And that's the day of worship.
What?
That gives the day
Yep,
of
they'd give
worship.
some for worship. They'd give some to the temple for their purpose, for the giving of charity, for all of that. Then year 2, do the same thing. Year 3, do the same thing. Year 4, do the same thing. Year 5, do the same thing. In year 6, keep back extra because you're going to need it for year 7. And by the way, occasionally for year 8. Because after 7 Sabbaths, you had another year you weren't allowed to plant. You had a 2-year stretch because you had the Sabbath year of the fields, and then you had the year of Jubilee. So guess what God would have to do on year 48? Double or triple. That'd be the year you had a huge crop. Kept enough to keep for those days. Now, also on the 50th year, what happened? All your debts went away. If you had bought somebody into slavery, they went free. If you'd bought a fellow Hebrew into debt slavery, they went free. Their debt was paid. All of those things. So here's the picture, and it fits very much into this. And I know we've chased the rabbit here. You don't chase wealth. You chase what you need, and God will provide it, and then anything good. But Solomon gets very much into this. Chasing wealth, chasing honor, chasing wisdom, chasing folly. If you're chasing all these things apart from God, it will not work for you. Because, and verse 9 gives us the full, chapter 9 gives us the full answer. Why? Because everybody's going to die. You can chase wealth, chase pleasure, chase wisdom, chase this, chase that, chase this. And guess what eventually is going to happen to each of you? You're going to die. Once heard a guy say that the ultimate statistic, 1 out of every 1 person dies. And by the way, there's no exception. Jesus died. Now he's not going to die again. But here's the fun part. Everybody else that Jesus rose from the dead, guess what happened to them? They died again. He raised Lazarus from the dead. What happened to Lazarus? He died. So, watch. So he says, verse 7 of chapter 9, go eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do if you're not chasing. Let your garments be clean. Let there not be oil lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife you love all the days of your life that God has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life and in which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in the grave to which you are going. So Solomon is saying this. He's saying, the food you have to eat, eat it with contentment and joy. The drink you have to drink, and in this case, of course, it's wine because that's what they drank then. Be merry because God, if you're doing what God has told you to do. Keep your garments clean. Don't let oil be lacking on your head. What is he talking? Don't spend all your time in sackcloth and ashes and mourning with your head covered with ash because you're going to die. Instead, live a regular life. Enjoy life with your spouse. Because guess what? Eventually, you're going to die. You might as well enjoy what God has given you while you're here. Now, we've joked around that Ecclesiastes is kind of depressing because he's all this vanity and chasing after the wind, and it's all terrible and it's all bad. Not really. What it really is this. Stop chasing after more and instead enjoy what God has given you, because even if you chase after everything else, you're still going to die. And it's better to just live your life following after him. Okay, so let's close it with the last bit. Okay, in the very last chapter. Okay, well, let's look at 11 really quick. It does give some advice on how to deal with your riches and your money. It
says, cast your bread upon the waters and you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on the earth. Now, here is the fun thing, okay? This is, there is no other way to explain this. In a way, this is Solomon giving financial advice. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Look, cast some of your wealth out on the water. Be
What
generous.
does water stand for? Others?
Well,
Other stuff?
think about feeding the birds, feeding the ducks. You take your bread, you cast it on the water for others to eat. Okay. Let's be completely fair. Not so much how it works now, but what was the purpose of this? What was the purpose of a bank? Now, I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but when you open a savings account, why does the bank pay you interest? Because you're giving them your money to use for other things. So, for example, you have extra money. You put it in the bank, in a savings account to grow for you. There is benefit for that. But the other half of that is then the bank can go in and take so-and-so who wants to open a restaurant and they don't quite have enough money. They go to the bank and say, we'd like to borrow the money to open this restaurant. He says, okay, well, you have to pay it back and you have to pay us an amount of interest to borrow the money. Well, then in addition, you take the person who gave you the money to put in savings that they are now loaning out to somebody else. They pay you an amount. Now, the thing we run into today is greed, and we want to make money too. I mean, let's be fair. That is part of the discussion of today. But in the system as it works, the idea was this is casting your bread upon the water. I'm going to put my money in a place where that it can then be used by someone else. Maybe one of the best examples of that is there used to be a process in farming communities called the Grange, right? And you had a bunch decide, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're all going to pool our grain together. Then we're going to sell it. And that way we get a better price. But in return for that, this group would keep some of the money to use to help further the purposes of all the farmers. Or that's the idea. Okay. Now, when you get corruption in it, it all falls apart. But as long as it's working correctly, then there's value to this. You take some of your extra and put it in a place where it can help others. And then here's the idea. After many days, you'll find it. Now, God says this in another way in Malachi. Do you really think you can outgive me? Now, we see in Matthew at the temptation of Jesus this moment where it says, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. Okay, remember he says, throw yourself off this mountain and see if the angels will catch you. And he goes, don't put the Lord your God to the test. There is actually an exception to that rule. In Malachi, it's talking about giving to God and giving what God should have for the temple and all that. And he goes, test me and see if you can outgive me. Here we are. Cast your bread out and see if I won't return it. So does that mean you always get the return of your money? No. But if you cast your bread on the water, if you give to those who are in need, if you give to those who can use when you have enough, do you really think you can outgive God and he won't bless you? You think he won't bless you more than you gave? Will it be money? Might be, but it might not. But what are we really seeking after? Money or God's blessing? Okay. So the verse 4, he goes, the one who observes the wind will not sow, and the one who regards the clouds will not reap. If you spend all your time looking for the perfect time to do something, you'll never do it. Okay. Then in chapter 12, as we close this book, we see this. it says, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come, and the years draw near of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Now, here's really the fun of this. Remember your God when you're young, while you still can enjoy your life. Because when you get really old, you may not really enjoy your life so much anymore. Solomon is being very much a realist. Maybe you should remember God when there's still time left instead of waiting until you're old and feeble and can barely get around and then suddenly, now I want to seek God again. Which almost seems to be a self-discussion for Solomon, that he had sought after everything else for so many days, and now he's old, he's about to die, and he goes, now I'm trying to seek God again, and I realize I wasted all this time. And by the way, he brings up vernacular. He says, before the sun and the light and the moon are darkened and the clouds return after the rain. So first, you can't see. The light of the sun and the moon are darkened. Why? Because you've lost your ability to see. In the days when the keepers of the house tremble, when your muscles are trembling now because they've gone weakened. The strong men are bent. So, when you were young, you were strong, and now you're bent over and can barely do anything. And the grinders cease because they're few. You've lost a lot of your teeth.
Grinder's teeth.
Yeah.
It's cute.
And those who look through the windows are dimmed. You're cataracts. And the doors on the street are shut. When the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of the bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low, they are afraid also. So there is this idea of remember your Creator when you're young, before your body starts to fall apart and you can no longer enjoy the blessings that come from remembering God. And then in verse 13, the very last verse, it says, at the end of the matter, when all has been heard, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. So when all of this has been said and done, when 12 chapters worth of wisdom is all over, here's what Solomon wants to say. Fear God and keep his commandments. That's the entirety of the book. Do you want to have a good life? Or at least a life where you can find contentment? Fear God and keep his commandments. It's a very interesting book in that he's very real about what it looks like to chase after all these other things. But what is it? He's a very wise man who's realized he wasted so many years of his life. Which, by the way, also says something very important. No amount of wisdom can save you from bad choices.
Another is this, that God will bring every deed into judgment and every secret thing, whether good or evil.
Because God will make the decision on whether what you did was right. All right. So next week we go from an old guy talking about how he wasted his life to young people in love. I am going to be fair. Song of Solomon is always a really fun book to get into because it feels like it should be PG-13. However, as we get into it, I'm hoping to be able to explain the reason that God does this and the reason that he had Solomon write this book. I think there's some very, very valuable lessons to it. So we will be there next Wednesday. Try not to blush when you read it because it is a little rough on that.
I heard a joke that says it's a meme out there right now that goes when he asks you to come over for Bible study, but he wants to go through Solomon.